everyone, welcome to the FoodTube channel for pizza. So firstly, what is yeast? Yeast is a living microorganism. We also know it is very similar to a fungi. It's known as a single cell fungi. Fungi, we think of mushrooms, we think of other edible things, so it's not quite like bacteria, but it does have a very similar life function in the way it works. We refer to it as a fungus with a sweet tooth because it really feeds on energy and sugars in foods. It's not sugar just itself, because there's types of sugar in actually the starch of the flour. So while some people add a teaspoon of sugar to help give it a boost, it's actually already in our food product. The fermentation process really thrives on this, and that's what helps produce our carbon dioxide, the CO2, which creates the air pockets in our dough. So whilst we can add that spoonful of sugar, we don't need to. In a bread, perhaps more so, because we definitely want that really effective rise, but it's not so necessary when we're looking at a pizza dough in itself. So, perfect conditions for our yeast. We're looking really to create this perfect environment. You can see in the picture that we do an experimentation usually with our yeast to see the best conditions for it to grow in, and we can really see how it thrives. It's usually the warm water which is our key thing here. So our yeast needs food, it needs warmth, which we get with the water, along with the moisture. It needs oxygen, somewhere to breathe as a living organism, and it needs time in order for this to take place. What other food products are made using yeast? Well, you're really familiar with bread. That's an obvious one for all of us. This project, which we're looking at making our own pizza base, and two which are possibly less obvious. We've got hot cross buns and donuts, which both use yeast to give those air pockets, thus creating the sponge-like texture. And so to our recipe, you will need the following: 225 grams of strong white bread flour. I'm using wholemeal in this case. 25 grams of block margarine or lard or butter melted. A 7-gram sachet of dried yeast. Half a teaspoon of salt and 150 ml of warm water. Firstly, you will need to sift your flour into a large bowl. We sift for 3 reasons. Firstly, to remove any lumps. Second, to aerate the mixture to get air into it. And thirdly, to remove anything that doesn't belong. Now, being wholemeal flour that I'm using today, it will naturally have more to it, so not all of it will fall through the sieve, simply because those are the large parts of the grain that normally would be discarded. So I just checked through to make sure there was nothing in there that I didn't want to add in. Add your butter, use a table knife and mix in using a figure of 8 motion. This will mean that the butter is evenly distributed throughout and will produce a nice even mixture. Next thing to do is to add in your salt and the dried yeast. Again, thoroughly mix these in to make sure it is thoroughly combined. Next, we need our warm water. We need to mix it in little by little, making sure that we're carrying on with that figure of 8 motion to really combine that up into a nice dough. As mentioned earlier, we use warm water to help create perfect conditions to help rehydrate and give a boost to help activate our yeast, ready for us to have our bread dough mixture. By adding the water little by little, we are able to control how much liquid we add. So you will need to use your own judgment to make sure the dough is wet enough to come together, but not too wet, which could make it sticky. We can test this by using our hands to try and pull it together. If the dough will start to ball up, it should leave the bowl really nice and clean. So if you have a look now, you can see that I'm working it round and it's leaving that in a nice round ball, nothing's breaking apart. If it has got too sticky, you could easily mix in more flour to your dough to rectify. Now ready to work into your dough, you'll need to have a floured surface and hands, and this helps prevent the dough from sticking too much as we knead it. Why do we need, you may well ask? It is to combine and work the dough into a smooth and pliable texture. In bread making, kneading helps to develop the gluten strands in the flour, which help it become more flexible, and it provides a stretchiness in the dough which expands as it proves. And as it expands, it traps all the released CO2 from the yeast as our bubbles or air pockets. But let me explain actually what it is and what you need to do in order to knead it effectively. Kneading, we do it with the heel of our hand, that is the bottom part of your palm where it's nearest the wrist, and we stretch out by pushing away with that hand or that part of the hand, and I use my opposite hand to hold the dough in place, so you're pulling and stretching between 2 points, and this helps that gluten really to become more and more elastic. It will start to break apart at first. You can see it's doing so at the moment, so you can test the elasticity by stretching the dough and seeing if you can get it really nice and thin before it breaks. So that helps you measure the success of your kneading. With kneading all done, what's left to do is to prove it. So keep it somewhere nice and warm, tuck it up with a tea towel, and we'll come back to that in a good 2 hours. Of course, it's more ideal to leave it overnight. However, make sure wherever you pop it, it's got plenty of time to get that lovely warmth. So think about leaving it in the airing cupboard or near a radiator, not on a radiator because that'll be too hot, and again not in the oven as it'll be too hot. So somewhere nice and warm. After this time, you will notice that your dough's doubled inside. If you pull it apart, you can see those air pockets and the stretchiness of all that gluten. So now we're going to work into it. So clear your space, dust down your side again, and we're just going to knead it for a little bit longer, just so it's prepped ready and pliable and flexible, ready for us all to spread out and create a nice base for our pizza. Dust down a tray with a tiny bit of flour, which will help prevent the dough from sticking directly to the tray as it cooks and help get a nice crisp base to our pizza. And use your hands to really help spread it out. It does help to have a little bit of stickiness to a tray, so if you've got a really good grease-proof tray, you won't need as much flour as maybe you would if you've got an older tray. Now, use your hands and the whole flat of your hand really to stretch it out. Don't put any direct pressure on any one area, otherwise you'll cause a hole. You can easily, as you've seen me do, just use your fingers to blend it back together and gradually apply that pressure to let that dough spread out to the edges. Working directly onto a tray means we can get a perfect rectangular shape and get a full-size pizza for you to cover with all your toppings. You may get a little frustrated as your dough does ping back into place, but be persistent and keep working it and pushing it out, and you'll get your final dough.